emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 126.EZ2010, certificate number 50204. Bir Tawil.
An Indian explorer has declared himself the king of an 800 square mile strip of no man's land in Africa. The 24-year-old Suyash Dikshit has laid claim to the strip of land between Egypt and Sudan, calling it the Kingdom of Dikshit. He has also planted his flag and has invented investments and citizenship. He's planning to approach the United Nations with his demand to make a formal claim to the kingdom.
Bir Tawil.
Bir Tawil. Bir Tawil.
It's fun to say. What did Shakespeare's bartender say to him? Bir Tawil is a place.
Mm-hmm.
It is a place with not a whole lot going on, but it's gotten a lot of attention.
Sounds like my
in
bedroom.
Recent events. Oh!
Ding!
Johnny Carson golf swing. The interesting thing about Bir Tawil is it is terra nullius.
Mm-hmm. Empty earth.
Land of no one.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially no man's land, in that it is one of the few places, vanishingly few places on the Earth's surface to which there is no political claim. Nobody wants it.
Isn't there some ownership of it just by default?
Yes. It's, it's not an island. It is located in the North African desert, the Nubian Desert, between Egypt and Sudan. But for complicated historical reasons, neither of them claim it. So it's essentially the same as the moon or most of Marie Byrd land in West Antarctica. It's land that's sitting there perfectly good, except that it's in the middle of an arid African desert. And yet everybody says their borders go neatly around it.
Is it full of toxic chemicals, or is it a giant hole in the ground?
It's full of nothing. It's an 800 square mile trapezoid in the middle of the desert. There are no permanent residents, much less any kind of cities or settlements.
Mm-hmm.
There are nomadic tribes who wander through its wadis, its dry river valleys, especially during the rainy season, I think. But there's almost no vegetation. There's nothing.
There are precedents for this, right? Like in the there are quite a few national borders that happen in the center of the Sahara, and those borders are probably defined by some sort of space line, but they're really from one end of the Sahara to the other. There's nothing, so they're more conceptual than anything else.
Sure, I'm sure there's people wandering around between Libya and Chad. There's not a big, Libya didn't build a wall and make Chad pay for it.
Right. I don't even know if there are people wandering around. If there are, it's because they crashed a B-17 in the 40s and
they're wandering around for about 12 minutes before they expire in the dunes.
Right.
But this is a case where each country has a very specific version of the border, and they are quite clear that Bir Tawil lies just on the other side of it.
Aha.
Like a lot of badly drawn arbitrary lines in the desert, this dates back to the British colonial period.
As so many things do.
As so many great things.
As so many border disputes.
Not just border disputes, but, probably polo, tea. But yeah, also...
Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, and also probably, mass genocide of poor people of color, I can only assume.
Well, and the fact that the Kurds have no homeland.
Sure, like Iraq is a good example. There is no Iraq. Let's just draw some straight lines on a map at Versailles, and suddenly you've got this new
Nation state.
Sunni state right next to.
Oh no, I'm
Shiite
sorry.
Iran.
It was most of the people in Iraq are Shiites,
Right.
but ruled by a Sunni overlord.
And the lines don't correspond to any actual religious or ethnic demarcation. So you have this weird kind of trapezoid-shaped country, which then proceeds to inevitably have a century of problems because
so many incidents of this.
Right. And in this case, it's because of Egypt and Sudan. In the late 19th century, Britain took over, the Khedivate of Egypt, this kind of local but not really independent Egyptian puppet government from the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And they claimed Sudan, but that wasn't going so well. In the late 19th century, there was a Sudanese religious zealot called the Mahdi, who was convinced that he was, Mahdi is an Islamic term for a promised Messiah. So he was the return of, he was the promised savior who would come. And he kicked up a lot of fuss, first against the local government and then against the British, which finally led to the siege of Khartoum and the death of General Gordon. Are you super up on all this? Are you going to start showing me lead figurines of the siege of Khartoum right now?
I'm listening respectfully. I understand what's happening. The Sudanese part of the Egyptian Sudan general area, which surprisingly has a lot of back and forth all the way back to the era of the pyramids.
Sure, they would trade with Kush,
Right.
and all these people, Nubia, all these people to the south where they'd get their amazing ivory and incense and whatnot.
And the Nubians of the Sudan repeatedly invaded what we think of as Egypt and conquered it and ruled it, and then vice versa.
Right.
But this is the late 19th century version of this, and there's a lot of stuff going on at this time globally, but also in this region, including the construction. This is all happening just post the construction of the Suez Canal.
Right. And Britain's building railroads as well. Everybody's making a massive land grab for Africa. And Sudan is particularly troublesome because they've got this religious zealot cutting off Chinese Gordon's head and on the steps of the palace in Khartoum and, leaving it in ordering it left in a tree wedged between tree branches for weeks so that the children can laugh at it and the hawks can wheel overhead.
And he's established a caliphate that's under Sharia law, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. He's gonna kick out the British and lead sort of a charismatic religious leader, an Islamist state.
This feels ripped from the headlines.
No, this never happened again. The funny thing is it stays contemporary even in Sudan, which I didn't know. As late as the 1980s, the prime minister of Sudan was the great-great-grandson of the Mahdi. Like, this guy left a political dynasty that continued ruling the country through independence and beyond.
And this area has taken on, at this time in the late 19th century, tremendous significance, not just because of the colonial, land grab of Africa. All the, Belgium and France, they're all down there trying to gather as much of Africa as they can to provide wealth to support their crumbling dynasties in Europe. But not to return too many times to the Suez Canal, although it's a favorite topic of mine.
We should return to the Suez Canal.
It tremendously increased the strategic significance globally of this area because all of a sudden, all the ships that used to go around the Horn of Africa are now cutting through this region, and all the ports are really significant, and there's a lot of wealth moving through here.
Yeah, suddenly the Red Sea is the center of the world.
Right.
And that's where the Nubian Desert is. It's right between the Nile River and the Red Sea. And so at the end of the war, after a few years of the Mahdi's rule, he dies soon after taking Khartoum. His family continues to rule. And in the 1890s, Britain launches a kind of reconquest of the Sudan, manages to take it back. And at this point, they have to decide how they're going to draw the borders of this new acquisition, between Egypt and Sudan. And there's two attempts. The original attempt is in 1899. The treaty goes straight across the 22nd parallel. It's a horizontal line between Egypt and Sudan.
Just like the U.S.-Canada border.
Sure.
They're just like, we don't understand this area at all, so let's just draw a straight line.
It's probably what you would expect to see on a map today if you can picture southern Egypt. I guess our listeners maybe live in a world without these weird straight line borders, but we have plenty of them just for convenience. It's not always mountain ranges or rivers.
I really hope, and I hope and pray that some new Woodrow Wilson does a better job of negotiating how the borders of these regions are apportioned, because these straight lines are not effective.
It'll be one of these, electoral wonks that's always telling us how congressional districts should look in our time.
Right. This is the opposite of gerrymandering. This is just like
Tom mandering. In the future, everything will be gone except for 538, and the nerds will finally be able to make the map look the way they always wanted to.
So the first attempt at a border just went straight across. The 22nd parallel.
Right. But then in 1902, there's a little nuance. It's now the 20th century. The world's getting more complicated. The British apparently know a little more about their new protectorate.
In 3 years' time.
3 years later, somebody's actually gone on the ground and realizes that the mountain of Bartazuga, although it's south of the border, has a Egyptian, largely ethnically Egyptian population. Whereas the Beja people who live on the Red Sea are Sudanese, but they are north of the 22nd parallel.
Right.
And so, these are the enlightened men in monocles at their conference. And they say it's easy. We'll use the 22nd parallel, but we'll do one little jog north to put Bartazuga in with Sudan. And then we'll take a jog south to put the Beja people in with Egypt.
Sure. This seems like if you're going to come in and arbitrarily draw borders as a colonial power who knows nothing about the area, this seems pretty progressive.
And it's, it's a little less Minecrafty looking now. It seems like it's a nod to actual nomads who might actually live there. The Ababdas and the Bejas, respectively. I almost said respectfully.
Respectfully.
They thought they were being respectful. And so now there's two versions of the map. And that becomes a problem when Egypt and Sudan claim independence. Because now there's two versions there's two places that overlap. Bir Tawil, a little trapezoid, and then a triangle on the coast called the Halaib Triangle. Because according to the 1899 borders, one is Egyptian, one is Sudanese, but on the later border, it's the other way around. The one is Sudanese and the other is Egyptian.
Right, and one of them probably worth
One of them is good.
One of them worth more than the other.
Everyone wants the Halaib Triangle. There's nothing wrong with Bir Tawil. It's perfectly nice.
Right.
I mean, it's not. It's terrible. But nobody's trying to get rid of it because it's a super fun site. But the Halaib Triangle is on the Red Sea, so strategic ports, as you mentioned.
Right, nice area.
There's vegetation, and there is, at least later in the 20th century, we know there's natural gas. There's the hope of oil exploration.
Oh, boy.
So the Halaib Triangle is a real bonanza.
Sure, and this is 800 square miles or more?
Bir Tawil is about 800 square miles. The Halaib Triangle is slightly larger. It seems like it's a little over 1,000. And it's now called Bir Tawil, which, by the way, is a word that the Ababda nomads used when they would pass through. It means deep well.
Oh.
So there must have been some water source that the nomads knew of, some oasis there that they would stop and use. But except for that, Bir Tawil means nothing to no one. So as a result, Egypt prefers the 1899 border that puts Bir Tawil in Sudan. But Sudan prefers, to this day, the 1902 border that puts Bir Tawil in Egypt. And everyone says, nope, that little trapezoid is not ours.
Now, wait a minute. So Egypt prefers the 1899 border, not because they don't want Bir Tawil, but because they do want
the Halaib Triangle.
The Halaib Triangle.
If there was a way to claim both, sure. These people, they aren't dummies.
Sure, but making a claim for this land, they're basing their claim on the first treaty.
Yes.
And then Sudan is basing their claim on the second treaty.
Right.
But that disincludes Bir Tawil.
Yes.
Aha.
So the British thought they were doing everybody a favor with this new enlightened border, and instead it just jacked everything up for a century.
Now, is this separation between Egypt and Sudan happening at some point before the 1956 independence of Sudan? Or is this a result of the throwing off of the colonial powers that happened after World War II?
Well, it really doesn't matter much, this place. The Nubian Desert is the size of California. So to get to Bir Tawil, you would have to, leave, the Aswan area by Lake Nasser in southern Egypt and travel south for hours in a place with, I think, no roads. Or you'd have to go north from the northernmost city in northern Sudan and again drive through a terrible wilderness filled with poor gold prospectors scrambling for a thin living and armed criminal gangs, Mad Max style gangs, preying on the gold prospectors, and the occasional government patrol preying on the armed gangs. And if you can do that, then you get to this place in the middle of nowhere. So it doesn't come up much.
This sounds like one of those adventures that you used to see in Camel cigarette ads in the 1970s, where there'd be like 3 Land Rovers and a couple of guys with blonde mustaches smoking cigarettes out in the middle of the desert.
It didn't really become an issue, I think, until the 1990s when some Canadian oil company said, hey, we'd love these natural gas rights in the Halayib Triangle.
Right.
And at that point, Sudan tried to close the border, and Egypt said, no way, the border's actually over here, and it led to a diplomatic standoff. So now it's actually a real issue.
So in the international convention of this kind of border history, what is the accepted stance? Did the 1902 border supersede the 1899 border so that the international community recognizes the more contemporary treaty, or does the 1899 treaty stand because it was the first treaty and later subsequent treaties are disallowed because they were made by adventurers?
Right. The second treaty should stand. It should supersede the first one.
Right.
Except that my guess is there is usually what happens here, as we discussed when we told the future about the pig war, and it turned out that the treaty was unclear between the US and Canada, probably when Egypt and Sudan were created.
There was a further treaty.
Yeah, and that just said, the existing border set by Britain and did not specify.
Right.
So in general, when there's some ambiguity like that, these things will eventually go to some UN deliberative body. I know there are cases where both countries will send delegations to, feverishly study old maps for years, trying to find some clause in the wording that makes their case a little better. But generally, some referee ends up deciding these things, not too differently than when the Pope would tell Spain and Portugal, hey, this part is Brazil and this part is Argentina, suck it up.
Sure. And I wish the Pope could intervene here, except that we're talking about Muslim countries.
Maybe he'd be the best one to intervene.
Oh, sure. He has no dog in this race.
He has no stake. He thinks they're all going to hell. And he's a much nicer, cuddlier guy now. We currently have a friendly Pope.
Oh, we do have a friendly Pope. To futurelings who are probably living under a draconian Pope,
a super mean, like Borgia style 16th century Pope.
Yeah, bad Pope who has sex with his cousin, but is also like inspiring like future Martin Luthers.
We have a super nice one who sneaks out at night to shanty towns.
Yep, this one wears flip flops, and he believes in human rights.
And surfs.
And he surfs, right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. And I wrote. So when I discovered that Bir Tawil was terra nullius, of course, this is a very kind of romantic thing for me because it harkens back to an age when the world was not fully explored.
Right. This seems unusual in our time, but also pretty exciting that there would be a place in the world that nobody wanted. You could go like build your weird separatist like
homeland for people who like love parakeets in a very physical, sexual, erotic way.
Yeah. So is that happening?
There were during the 20th century a spate of these little micronations, people taking over oil platforms or river islands or whatever and saying that this is now their homeland. Mm-hmm. And there were some people who did that to Bir Tawil. If you look online, you can find kind of armchair explorers who have read about this place, declaring that they now run the kingdom of the state of Bir Tawil, or the emirate of Bir Tawil, the Grand Dukedom of Bir Tawil. There's an empire of Bir Tawil, United Arab Republic of Bir Tawil. There's even a United Lunar Emirate of Bir Tawil. Even our lunar overlords have landed from the moon to plant their flag.
And by armchair explorer, you're saying that none of these people have actually been to Bir Tawil?
As far as I know, none of these people actually went there.
I see.
And in 2011, I wrote a little stub about Bir Tawil for a travel magazine, and I ended what I wrote by saying, "Do you want Bir Tawil? It's unclaimed land, so go ahead and set up shop. This can be the fabled homeland for your ethnic group, religious sect, or fringe political belief of choice," which I thought was, a funny joke.
Sure. But then you got an angry letter.
Unfortunately, 3 years later, it came true. I don't know if somebody in particular saw my words as a challenge or if it was just one of these guys spinning a globe.
It was Marilyn Vos Savant, wasn't it?
Marilyn Vos Savant, just with the power of her brain, could sense unclaimed land in the Sahara. No, it was oddly, a Virginia man named Jeremiah Heaton. In various news accounts, he's sometimes a farmer. Sometimes he's a mining company employee. He ran for Virginia's 9th congressional district as an independent, and then I think 2 years later as a Democrat back in the early 2000s.
I'm picturing him in a big floppy hat with a blunderbuss.
You can kind of imagine the kind of dabbler this is, with a different job in every newspaper profile.
Jeremiah, Virginia.
Good old Jeremiah Heaton has a daughter, a 7-year-old daughter named Emily, going through a princess phase.
Sure.
Is this something you can identify with?
I absolutely can. I have a 7-year-old daughter going through a lengthy princess phase.
Well, you are probably not as good a dad as Jeremiah because
True.
When he,
almost certainly
on so many levels. But what he did was she really wanted to be a princess, and instead of doing what you or I would do, which would be to say, you can be anything you want to be, honey,
right.
or tell us what you like about your favorite princess. Oh, you also are kind to animals, or
I say to my daughter, what about a ninja princess? Because, I really wanted a son. No, of course that's untrue.
How come sons are never wandering around the house saying they want to be princes?
Princes. I would like to be. I'm sure there are listeners who have 7-year-old sons who do want to be princes.
Daddy, I want a little velvet cap.
Yeah.
And sleeves that are puffier at the cuff than at the shoulder.
I actually maybe was that child because my dad routinely would return from European trips with little velvet suits and puffy shirts for me.
Is that why you're sitting across from me right now wearing those little purple velvet shorts?
And the pointy-toed slippers is a big part of it. But
I thought you were an elf. I totally misunderstood the point of this podcast.
Very large elf. I was one of those kids that wanted my mother's cast-off makeup. Anytime she had a lipstick that she wasn't using anymore or a rouge box, she would give it to me, and I had a makeup kit, and I would make myself pretty. I would put lipstick on and rouge, and it was kind of a big part of being, for me, I guess, between the ages of 6 and 9.
26.
Yeah, 6 and 26. I think by the time I was 9, I wasn't making myself pretty anymore, but for several years there as a child, I had, I kind of prized my makeup kit. Maybe not over my Legos, but it was certainly one of my favorite toys.
Did you sit on the floor of your mom's closet kind of touching her shoes tenderly?
No, I think I imagined that I was a 17th century prince of Scotland because I had very little idea what really the aesthetic of Scotland was. But because
when I think of Scotland, I think of rouge and lip gloss.
But I think I had like a Louis XIV idea of what it was to be a prince. Mm-hmm. But the Scots wore kilts. So I just sort of made the connection.
They must be the most.
They're the most
gender bending.
Yeah, sort of the prettiest of all because I did have kilts that my father had brought back. So I would,
You also wore kilts.
I wore kilts.
The plot thickens.
Well, it's part of my family lore. My grandfather was ashamed of being Welsh, and so lied to his own kids and said he was Scottish and descendant from, of course, as every American says, descendant from Scottish princes. And so my father and his siblings believed their own father and then passed that down to me. And so we thought we were Scots.
You discovered late in life you were actually a false Scot.
So my dad and his siblings went back to Scotland in the mid-1980s and searched everywhere for any connection to, they were like, we're the Rodericks. And every Scottish person they met said, Roderick is a first name in Scotland. There are no people with the surname Roderick. And little by little, they unraveled this thread and realized that we were Welsh. But anymore, there's no stigma attached to being Welsh. It's not assumed that you Welsh on your debts.
Right. I was about to say, that's our word for not making good on a debt does come from the sneakiness of the Welsh people.
Sure, it was a slur. And now it was fine to be Welsh. And so anyway, we've embraced our Welsh heritage. But at the time in the 70s, my dad would bring back all this Scottish, these tartans and things, kind of trying to bolster the story that we were
the heritage.
So we were Scot princes.
My daughter went through a princess phase, but I never promised her an actual castle because that's insane.
But in this case, Jeremiah of Virginia,
He made a flag for his new country. He read about Bir Tawil, made a flag, a very kind of Disney princessy kind of a flag, a gold crown on a field of blue surrounded by
a golden dragon,
the stars and
a dragon and a lion,
rays or whatever.
Right.
And he secured permission from the Egyptian government to drive south from Egypt into what's normally a part of the desert that's barred by military, and led some jeep convoy to Bir Tawil and planted a flag and flew home and got on the internet saying that he was now King Jeremiah of the Kingdom of North Sudan.
He went there and got permission from the Egyptians to do this?
Well, the so that's a big part of his story is that he has permission from the Egyptians.
Right, but they
Because
just
that
gave
rhymes.
him permission to go, not to seize.
Yes, I think he got some kind of permit. He paid $200 to whoever would let him drive a jeep convoy south through someplace the military would normally stop you at a checkpoint.
Right.
They didn't know that he had a velvet flag in the back of the
Right.
jeep. And he got home and told his daughter she was now a princess. She was part of the ruling family of the Kingdom of North Sudan. She has no subjects, of course.
Right.
There's no population in North Sudan. He didn't ask any of the Ababda nomads what they thought of their new blonde 7-year-old goddess.
And I guess there's plenty of precedent for this in history.
Not recent history, John. Not good parts of history.
Not recent history, but the nation of Liechtenstein,
Okay.
which is a very small country kind of carved out of the border area between Switzerland and Austria, is named for and was a duchy of the family Liechtenstein, who never actually resided in Liechtenstein, and at the time of its creation had never been to or visited in any way.
They're like record executives with a tax shelter?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, my company's in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein.
It was like a reward, some Holy Roman Empire style reward. Like, oh, you guys, you get your own duchy. It's over here in Liechtenstein. And they were like, yeah, we're fine living in Vienna or whatever.
The restaurants are much better here. We're not going anywhere without good chamber music.
Yeah, I don't think the roads were particularly good at that time because they're not very good even now.
So Jeremiah Heaton was when word of this got around, when he started telling people, hey, I'm now the king of the Kingdom of North Sudan, there was immediately a wave of bad publicity on a couple levels. First of all, he's a bad parent because when his daughter had some whim that she would have forgotten about by the next afternoon,
Right.
he instead drove to Sudan to deliver her fondest dreams.
Right.
Which is always what makes amazing children if you give them everything they want.
Sure.
That's what Charlie and the Chocolate Factory taught me.
Sure, but without that, there wouldn't have been the band Veruca Salt. So
That's true.
there's good and bad.
There should be 4 other bands named for the other children.
Right.
Like I would listen to Mike TV on the radio.
Oh, don't do it, Ken.
Let's see. Can we do the rest?
This is what happened the last time when you talked about Bir Tawil.
What happened when I talked about Bir Tawil?
Well, you created the nation of Bir Tawil.
Oh, I
Because
see.
almost certainly this guy heard about it by reading your column in Parade magazine.
This is the Angel of Moles.
Right.
This is all kinds of fictional journalism about there being a possible country here actually turning into a real country.
Yeah.
I don't think I was to blame.
No, but
Anybody could look at an atlas and say, hey, what's this weird trapezoid?
But anyone now could listen to this podcast and start a band called Mike TV, is what I'm saying.
So he was criticized for that, not just being a parent, for being a bad person, for being a bad white person.
Well, a colonial.
Right. Like a colonizer, as they would say in Black Panther.
Wow.
Like that guy flew across the ocean to some little bit of land in Africa.
Right.
To
which he held no rightful claim.
But what he did have, a lovely flag.
All right.
A fancy flag.
And a permit to travel.
Because he paid somebody off. He's got cash and a flag. And now he can say he's the king of North Sudan. And this is not hypothetical for many of those people who were descendants of tribes who had to work for King Leopold of Belgium in his, what was he? I was going to say sweat mines, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't mining sweat from the Congo. What was he mining? Gold?
Well, everything. The Congo is a very rich part of the world. And so King Leopold was up there just raping and pillaging, literally. That's where we get that phrase.
Yeah, it wasn't the nice kind of rape, like carrying off a lady to a different village. It wasn't like the Roman kind.
Right.
There was actual terrible stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so this is not hypothetical to people in Africa or well-meaning white columnists writing on their behalf.
Right, or the Twitter army who are looking every morning for something to be mad about.
For some new offense. And so there's immediate backlash to the Kingdom of North Sudan. It's not even real, and it's immediately the least popular country on earth. It's worse than North Korea.
But this guy has run for public office in Virginia, so he's no stranger to being yelled at by strangers.
Sure, he's been a wacko third-party candidate in the weird little triangle at the end of Virginia, so he knows what he's talking about. And he created a Kickstarter.
Back when people did that.
He was trying to take his narrative back. So this was in our day, this was a way in which people could make strangers pay their bills.
Right.
Other generations had Robinhood, I guess. We have GoFundMe. And the tagline was, this would be the world's first crowdfunded nation.
Huh.
Get in on the ground floor. Help us build the kingdom of your... And he would sell, what do counts have? Counties and duchies and
I see.
earldoms.
Right. He was dividing it up like a park bench in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Like, put your name on this.
It was, or like a dispossessed white Russian in the 1930s selling off all his weird titles.
Right, I see.
Earldoms. And what do counts have? Not a countdom.
No, counts actually do have counties. That's where we get the term.
Counties comes from?
Yeah, count was granted counties and not necessarily counties that touched each other.
It could just be little islands of... like you mean you have an archipelago of land?
Yeah, you could be a count and have like county here, county there.
That's why our word count comes from. You actually have to count.
You count your
number
counties.
of possessions you have.
1, 2, 3.
Three impoverished counties.
And like a count is a kind of nobility that's between a baron and a duke. So it's not a low-ranking like style.
What do barons have? Baronesses?
Baronies.
They have baronies?
Barons have baronies.
It sounds like a breed of dog, actually. Oh, it's a beautiful, shaggy Baronese.
Sure, they guard the temples of the Counts of Syrinx.
Is this some weird Masonic order you're trying to create for the future?
I'm afraid that was a Rush reference.
Oh man,
boo.
What's worse? What's a worse cult than Freemasonry? Rush fans. What if this guy's daughter had said she wanted to be like a pirate? Would he like robbed a bank? What if she wanted to be a Muppet?
No, I think he would have taken over a tanker ship in the Red Sea.
I'm the captain now. So this guy creates a Kickstarter and eager to be on the right side of every issue, tired of being pilloried by good progressives in the press. He says that his new kingdom is a blank slate, quote, ready to be developed into a cutting-edge research center for agricultural technology and energy efficiency.
Huh.
He wants to create a utopia, an agri-science forward-thinking utopia, Wakanda, in the middle of the Sudan.
Boy, this guy is really light on his feet.
That's, if he's run for office under two different political parties. Like, this guy knows which way the wind's blowing.
So did this work? Did this mollify all the dubious naysayers?
Well, no. His Kickstarter earned only a tiny fraction of the, I think, $250,000 he needed to... I don't even know. What's he going to do there?
I don't know. Put
soy farms there, or maybe just take the money and run. And
my sense is the first thing you do in a lot of these cases when you buy land is you put a Gulfstream trailer on it. Like you drive out there with a
food truck.
No, you drive out.
Hope that the Ababda nomads want tacos.
You buy some old RV and you think you're going to go live on it while you build your cabin. And then what it ends up being is like an acre in the forest with an RV on it.
And you're just making meth.
Well, and the RV starts to leak, and then pretty soon you never go there again.
And he was also pitching, Jeremiah Heaton was also pitching other governments, and particularly corporate higher-ups, with the promise that in his country, multinational corporations would be unfettered by taxes and regulations.
This is the big one, right?
So he's also, we already know he's a little odd, but now we know he's a libertarian. We found something worse than Rush listeners.
Yeah, this is like flagging your ship in the Cayman Islands.
Yes.
Right.
And he's not the only one. There is a place called Liberland. Right. Have you heard of Liberland?
I feel like I have.
This is going to be right up your alley because it's on the banks of the Danube.
Maybe I read about it in Parade magazine.
I think this one's not my fault, John.
It's on the banks of the Danube.
Yes, which is, John Roderick, if you were a river,
I have
would be the
traveled.
Danube.
I have traveled not the length of this river, but I have traveled this river at various stages.
If you have wandered its banks with any kind of bindle or walking stick or corncob pipe, you may have passed through Liberland. The Danube changes its course pretty frequently,
Right.
between, in this case, between Serbia and Croatia.
Yes.
And of course, every time a river changes its course, it becomes a legal nightmare. Like, do the people who are now on the left side of the river, does the border stay there, or
Right.
do they now move to the other country every time the river moves?
I have heard of Liberland. It's basically a swamp, right? It's a swampy area that people keep sailing across and planting flags, and the Serbs like have a patrol boat that is dedicated to just keeping people off of this sandbar.
Yeah, I believe the Croats have owned the border. It's the same kind of deal as Bir Tawil, where if Serbia or Croatia decides that they want this area, Gornja Siga, they would have to give up the part that actually has towns and stuff.
Right, where the river changed course
Right.
at some point and people live there.
And of course, everybody wants the town. Both governments want the towns, which means they both have to give up Gornja Siga, which is I think it's just, I don't know if it's swampy, but it's just undeveloped forest with an old barn or hunter's cabin or something.
Well, I feel like it is kind of not maybe entirely uninhabitable, but certainly like mosquito filled and not ideal.
It's off the grid.
Yeah.
But that's what you want if you are a right-wing Czech politician named Vid Jedlica.
Wait, he's a Czech?
Yeah.
Why does it
Total carpetbagger.
Why does a Czech have anything to do with this?
As a young man, he watched his father's company go bankrupt, which his father always blamed on the man, on, taxes and the government had raised interest rates or whatever.
Sure, this is where Hitler came from.
This is where every young college libertarian comes from, I think. And so he decided that his dream would be to set up a libertarian utopia where nobody pays taxes, there's no government regulation. I don't know why he didn't just go to Somalia.
Right.
They've already got a government for utopia, baby.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of people vying for that role in Somalia that he may not be equal to.
That's what I think of every time I see some car driving around unincorporated Snohomish County with that government is best, which governs least sticker.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I got some spots on the map for you. I don't know if you'll like them that much, but so Jedlica claims he has the rights to this place that neither Serbia nor Croatia wants. And Croatia has since closed the border on their side, which he says is tacit understanding that he can have it.
Right.
So he's got big plans. It's exactly how you would imagine some Ayn Randian weirdo starting a little Balkan country. He won the first presidential election there with one vote.
Yes.
Because his girlfriend voted for him.
Of course.
That was nice. I guess maybe it's a little different than most young libertarians because he has a girlfriend.
Oh, I wish I could ring a bell for that.
All the young Randians are tuning out now. I feel bad.
Yeah,
what if objectivism is the only religion left in the future and now our whole archive has been burned? Just because I was having a little fun with Liberland.
I feel like objectivism is on its last legs even now.
He is planning a Bitcoin-like digital currency because, of course, he is.
Is he going to have like an Estonian style, like open internet, free digital country?
I can only imagine, although right now there's no, cables or wires there. So he has a few tech challenges
Right.
to creating his new techno-libertarian utopia. The national motto is live and let live. And at one point around 2015, he assigned a straight-edge Czech rapper to compose his national anthem.
Is that guy still working on it, or has he actually composed the anthem?
I could just imagine that guy just taking more money. Yeah, it's taking me a little longer. I'm going to need 500 more liber bucks.
In the Czech language, he's going, a hip, a hop, a hip, hip, hop, and you don't stop rocking.
I would like to hear you do a pastiche of what you imagine straight-edge Czech rap to be.
Yeah.
Here, I'll do a beat.
The problem is the Slavs don't love being mocked. This is one of the characteristics of their national or their racial identity.
So if we go after objectivists, that's fine. But if we make a few too many defenestration jokes here, it's going to be
we've covered that ground already.
Jedlica is very bullish about his little libertarian utopia. He's received 200,000 emails requesting citizenship in its first week alone. This is probably because he went on the internet and said his country will have, quote, optional taxation.
And do the Croats agree that he can have title to this land and the Serbs do not?
No, I don't think anyone agrees. I don't think anyone likes him at all. The Croats have patrolled the border now, which to him is, they have recognized the border that stops here. Therefore, they're okay with, it's not a real claim.
Now, I just want to add one more thing because this whole idea has crossed over into an area of my own interest.
Which is taking over foreign governments.
No, which is the Aswan Dam. The Aswan Dam was built on the Nile River to collect the water of the Nile and to keep the Nile from flooding.
Just north of the Egyptian-Sudanese border, right?
Right. And the Aswan Dam was built, or there's a lower Aswan Dam that was built a long time before by the British, but the upper Aswan Dam was built in the 1950s during this period, the era where Sudan had declared its independence.
Egypt is modernizing under, I guess, Nasser at this point.
And Nasser is playing both sides of the Cold War against one another and secures financing and material support from the Soviet Union.
To build the dam.
To build the upper Aswan Dam as part of his diplomacy game against the Americans and the British.
One story I like here is that because the dam floods the lake upstream of it, they actually had to move temples brick by brick. Abu Simbel, they take apart brick by brick and move it to higher ground so it doesn't wind up at the bottom of Lake Nasser.
Right. But there were a lot of villages that they didn't bother to do this with.
Those are just the temples. The people can go hang.
So there was an area called the Wadi Halfa salient, which was another one of these areas. I wasn't entirely aware of the Halaib Triangle, but I was aware of this because this was an area along the Nile that was not really accessible from Egypt, but was accessible from Sudan. And there were numerous villages along the Nile in this area. And during this colonial period, they had agreed to allow the Sudanese to administer this land along the Nile. And after the Aswan Dam was built, the upper Aswan, it flooded all the villages in this region, but there's still a tiny little portion of what had been this salient, which is, I guess, according to your different border disputes, would still be included in this situation where it would be administered by Sudan, but there's nothing there. It's like a little tiny sliver of land because the flood basically flooded over what had formerly been the administrative borders.
That's exactly right, because it is based on the two different borders that the
Wadi Halfa
salient actually exists. Meanwhile, in North Africa, Jeremiah Heaton has some challengers.
Oh, really?
Yes, he's got a Siberian GPS tycoon
who mounted another Jeep expedition,
who also made his way to Bir Tawil and planted his own flag. He's one of these ham radio guys. We talked about this, I believe, guys who will just they'll go to some unreachable place. They'll go to Wake Island and set up a station so that amateur radio buffs all over the world can contact them while they're there and check it off their list, because these guys are obsessive place collectors, destination collectors.
So he set up a ham radio station out here in Bir Tawil?
Yeah, so he's always been going to weird places. And when he saw a unclaimed island on the map that was neither the National Geographic yellow of Egypt or the pink of Sudan, he was like, oh boy. I should do a Russian accent.
Oh boy.
That is for me. And
I don't think that's a good Russian accent.
No, what even was that? and so he planted his flag, and he claims that Heaton's claim is fake. And I think Heaton claims that he wants to know where Heaton's flag is.
Oh.
And Heaton's like, oh, so you can go pull it up? And he's like, no, just because I don't think you planted a flag.
Sure. Sounds like the stirrings of war.
He probably refers to himself in the third person.
Right.
Vladimir does not believe you planted flag.
There you go. Nice.
Redeemed. Does not believe you planted flag in desert. And so they
moose and squirrel are in big trouble.
So they each want to know where the other's flag is, probably so they can go, chop it into kindling.
Right, although it can't be cheap to travel to this area.
No, see, that's the thing. It's never going to catch on. It's a symbolic gesture. So I feel like it's okay to oppose it on well-meaning progressive symbolic grounds, because that's really all it is.
Right.
It doesn't make me want to go set up my own techno-utopia in the African desert.
No. Although the other area in question, the Halaib Triangle, does seem like a place that if you were going to go plant a flag,
sure.
You'd have some Red Sea ports, and you'd have some tree-lined streets.
Someday Heaton's going to have a son who wants to be a pirate, because that's what Disney's doing now. Their whole pirates thing is to try to give little boys an alternative to princesses and fairies.
Right.
And keep them buying the churros at the theme parks.
Right, but this could be a Moana type situation where she sails her boat with...
oh, wow. Sails across the Red Sea?
Yeah.
a kind of reverse exodus.
Yeah, sets up some situation with her giant jewel,
But there you've actually got to do some gunboat diplomacy.
She brings The Rock with her.
Young Emily Heaton and possibly The Rock or Vin Diesel, they have to show up with a bunch of rifles and start shooting up villages because there are people in the Halle Triangle and, 2 countries. This time you've got 2 countries. This is not Terra Nullius. This is Terra Doubleius.
Right.
You've got 2 countries who think they own the oil there.
Well, and one place you don't want to mess around right now is the Sudan, or rather Sudan, because they just had a civil war that lasted for decades. They all know how to clean their rifles.
Right. If there's one part of the world where little girls are not super safe,
right,
it might be Northern Africa. One last bit of good news for Vid Jedlicka. He has been recognized by Liberland, the libertarian utopia on the Danube, which, by the way, is on a waterway. It's not like Bir Tawil. You can sail a boat to Liberland. This is a little more of a real-world threat.
So now they're starting to recognize one another.
He has been recognized by exactly one other nation in the world.
Not coincidentally, also a Slav.
Wait, in what way is he a Slav?
Well, the Czech people are
see.
Slavic, and so are the Russians, although, not exactly like they're cousins.
But interestingly, it is not the Siberian who has recognized his claim.
Oh,
it's actually
the Virginia
farmer. It's actually King Jeremiah of the North Sudan.
Oh, wow, a little switcheroo.
I think he knows which side his bread is buttered on. He wants in on those liber bucks.
And that concludes Bir Tawil, entry 126.EZ2010, certificate number 50204 in the omnibus. In the unlikely event social media still exists in your era, these works and our other works, our adjacent works, are archived at Omnibus Project, basically on all forms of social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Probably new ones that have not been invented for us.
Snapchat, ChatSnap.
You have to have fake ones like, the fake street drugs, Gronk and Creek and Squeak.
Gronk Snap.
GeoBlanc.
Well, just look for us at Omnibus Project on GeoBlanc. I also had personal Instagram and Twitter accounts, and Ken had a Twitter account under at our respective names. You can send us emails through one of those Star Trek style
wormholes,
time wormholes that are never properly explained.
Time vortices.
At the email address omnibusproject@howstuffworks.com. And we have a fan group on Facebook called The Futurelings, and you can find them using even your most rudimentary Facebook finding skills.
Listeners, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization is going to survive. We hope and pray that whatever the singularity or cataclysm that awaits us may never come, may be held off indefinitely. But if it comes soon, this very recording, like all our recordings, could be our final word to you. But we hope that Providence will allow us to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.